you're likely not having the same toolset is running continuously in the background. How do we unify all that? Extremely useful wrapper around those things. What I really like about Skaffold. Today we'll play a game. I will try to guess how you work and what are your pain points, and you will have to tell me whether I'm correct. And if I'm correct, I might have a solution how to solve some of your problems related to development and deployment and building stuff. So let's start the game. Let me guess what you do. You are developing an application, and during the process of development you are continuously writing code, and in the background that code is being compiled, some tests are executed, and something is deployed. The result, the binaries are deployed somewhere so that you can check visually, verify whether what you're working on is doing whatever it's supposed to do. And that process is happening continuously in the background. You're writing code, compilation, deployment, and what's not is all happening in the background. And then when you're ready, you push your changes to Git. And then the automation starts. Some CI/CD pipeline is doing the same things you were doing locally, plus some additional things. And ultimately, all that gets to production. If that's not what you're doing, then this might be useful, because I will show you how you can do at least that local part of continuously monitoring for changes of your source code and building and running some unit tests and deploying locally and so on and so forth. On the other hand, if you are already doing that, then you're probably experiencing a problem of having too many tools, because you're probably building container images locally using Docker, and then inside of your clusters you cannot use Docker because it doesn't really work inside of Kubernetes, so you're using Kaniko. And locally you're deploying maybe with kubectl or Kustomize or Helm, and inside of the cluster you might be using different tools. Maybe you're using Argo CD, or maybe you are using Kustomize in production but kubectl locally, and so on and so forth. Hopefully all that is happening with the same manifest, because we do not really want to multiply the definitions and the code all over the place because we have different environments. But you're likely not having the same toolset used across the board, across all the environments, from local development to staging to production. It's important that we use different tooling, because different tooling allows us to do different things depending on the situation. For example, Docker is realistically probably the best way to build your container images locally, but it is potentially the worst way to build container images inside of a cluster. And same thing goes for deployment and so on and so forth. So there is that almost inevitable differentiator among tools used under certain conditions, in certain environments, and so on and so forth. And here comes the problem. How do we unify all that? How do we keep having all those different tools that are serving different purposes, and yet unify them somehow so that we can do all those operations using more or less a single wrapper, let's say. Yeah, wrapper would be a good term, right? How can we create a wrapper that will know which tools to use depending on the situation? One potential solution could be Skaffold. It is an open source project. It's a small binary that you install and does some potentially really cool things. And it can be very helpful, or not. We'll see. Let's review Skaffold. Let's explore it in 20 minutes or less and see whether it is useful and whether it can solve some of the problems that we might have. I did a couple of things before I started recording this session. I created a Kubernetes cluster, in this case Minikube. Whatever I'm going to show you works in any Kubernetes cluster. I installed Skaffold CLI, and what else did I do? Yes, and I cloned the Git repository that contains the demo code, the sample code of whatever I'm going to show you today. You will find the instructions how to get to the same point where I am right now, and all the rest of the commands I will show you in a gist, which is in the description. So go ahead, if you want to follow along, go ahead to the description, look for the gist, and you'll find all the commands, preparation, and what I'm about to do right now. So I am already in a repository with sample application, and I have a Docker file. That might be the only thing that really matters. And this is a simple Docker file. It just uses Hugo. It's a Hugo-based application, the simplest possible, to build the binary, and then it packages it in a container. This is a multi-stage Docker build. So there are multiple images involved. The last one will be used to deploy something, and those before to compile. Now, normally, I would have a stage here with tests. I was too lazy to write tests for this application, so you will need to use imagination and imagine that I am running unit tests every time I build a container image. So remember that. Imagine that I'm running unit tests as part of building container image. That part will be important later. I need Docker to build container image, I need kubectl, and I would need to start running commands, but that might be too complicated. And that's the first thing that Skaffold will solve. So I'm about to scaffold this project by creating the config file that will serve the purpose. You will see the purpose soon. So that would be scaffold init. Now, before I actually initialize, let me show you the help so that you see what it offers, right? It's relatively straightforward, not much there, but there are a couple of interesting things. Like, hey, you can provide a compose file, Docker compose file, to initialize it from there. You can generate the manifests. So if you do not already have Kubernetes manifests for this project, Skaffold can create them for you. If you already have them and they're in some obscure location that customers cannot find, you can specify where they are, and a few other things, right? So let's do it. Let's just go for it. Scaffold the init, and it says, hey, look, I detected a couple of things for you. To begin with, I am guessing that you want to build an image called vFarsing DevOps Toolkit. It figured it out based on the Docker file. That's kind of great. It found out where Docker file is, which is a default location. But here is an interesting part. It detected that there is already Kustomize in this repository. So it thinks, hey, if you already defined Kustomize manifests, that's probably what you want to use. And I'm going to try to be clever and guess that by default you want to deploy whatever is defined in the Kustomize base directory, but that you might want to run production based on the Kustomize overlays production directory. So it is fairly clever, and it figured out what I might or might not need. But for the sake of argument, let's say that that's not what I want, right? Let's start simple. Let's define a definition that will be used only for local development for now, and then we will extend it to production. So I'm going to say, no, I don't want it to create it for me. And I'm going to copy one that I already created in advance. So this is scaffold simple, and I will call it scaffold.yaml. This is the default path that Scaffold will expect. So let me show you clear. Let me show you what it is. Scaffold YAML. And this is the simplest one we're going to start with. And basically what this is telling Scaffold, hey, I want to build using Docker. I could build using other technology, and we are going to get there later. And the Docker file is there. This is the name of the image. And I would like to deploy not using Kustomize, because this might be too much for me as a developer on my machine. I'm going to use Kubernetes manifests and deploy using kubectl, and the manifests are in the K8s directory. Whatever is there should be deployable, right? So this is now for my local development. It's simple as possible. So let's see how that works. Scaffold dev. I want to start developing my application, so the natural, logical thing to do is to start developing Scaffold dev. And what it will do is it starts first watching the files in a directory, in the current directory. It generated the image, it is pulling it, and it is building it right now. The first release of my application, local release, right? It's not a real release. It is doing whatever is specified in Docker file. If I had tests, it would run tests as well, multi-stage builds. If you don't know what multi-stage builds are, let me know. I will create a video for you. And now it deployed my application that was built previously to Minikube, and it is running. Here we are. My application is running, and I can actually switch to a different terminal. Let me do that. So you can see that now my application is running. And that's nothing special. I mean, it is slightly special because it built my container image, it ran tests if I had them in multi-stage builds, and it deployed my application. Now I can start developing. Now I will, what should I do? Let me first see whether it really deployed everything. So get all, and you can see, yes, it deployed, there is a service, there is a deployment, there is replica set, everything I need. That's nice. It should have created ingress, get ingress. Here it is, and I can open the application in a terminal and confirm that it is really working. And you will see that it prefixed even the address with dev. That's awesome. So let me open that same address. And here's my application. This is my local this is the application deployed locally. That's the one I'm developing right now at this very moment. And let's put that to the test. Let me change something about the application. This is a simple one. So what shall I change here? Let's say that I'm simulating the development, and I will change the title here from the DevOps Toolkit series to is Skaffold working? And 3 question marks. And I will save that file. And pay attention to the left-hand terminal, right? This is where Skaffold is running. What happens when I save? It detected that I made changes to the source code, and it is repeating the process. It is running continuously in the background. It rebuilt the image, and now it is deploying a new release. It automatically generated unique tag for that image. So all this is happening in the background, and the only thing I have to do is write code. If you don't believe me, I can prove it to you. Let me switch to the browser and see what we got there. So if we refresh it, there we are, right? So it just magic is happening. It's building, it is deploying, it is doing whatever it needs to be done while I'm developing, and I can focus only on writing code. That could be everything I need while developing, right? I need my binaries to be built, I need my application to be deployed, and I need my tests to be executed, which I can execute by specifying them in Docker file, which I didn't this time because I was lazy, but I could have. But that, no matter how awesome it is, might not be enough. Sooner or later, I will want to push those changes to Git. And when I push those changes to Git, some process should build the real image, the final release, deploy it somewhere, and that might not be happening, as I said before at the very beginning, that might not be happening with Docker. We might use something else. And we might not deploy it in production using kubectl, but maybe customize. Let's say customize. It could be Argo City, it could be something else. So we need to extend the definition of Skaffold to allow different variations, right? Different profiles. And to do that, let me show you the references here to see what we can do with Skaffold. Here we are, and this is the definition basically of the full reference of what we can do with Skaffold. And now pay attention to this. When we go, when we look at the build section, we can see that we can build using Docker. That's what we are doing right now. But we can also build using Bazel or Jib or Kaniko, or what else is there? There must be a few other Buildpacks. Yes, Buildpacks are there, and they can be even custom builder if none of the existing builders meet our needs. And then when we switch to deployment, we can deploy with Helm, we can deploy with KPT, we can deploy with kubectl. That's what we're doing right now, customize, and that's about it. And we can specify different profiles, and this is the important thing. So let me show you a variation of what we have right now that would fit not only my local development, but also whatever is happening in my CI/CD processes. I'm going to stop this process, right? There is no need. I finished development. Right now, I want to show you how we can apply it to other environments. And I already prepared one, so I'm going to copy it, Skaffold, cleverly named better, to skaffold.yaml. And let's take a look at a slightly different definition of Skaffold, right? And in here we are saying, hey, you know what? The artifact that we are building is always going to be vFarsig DevOps Toolkit, but we will have 2 profiles, dev and production. Dev is the one that I'm going to continue using locally, And for development, we want to continue deploying using kubectl. So this is the same as before. But in production, we might want to deploy using Kustomize. All right, so in this simple example, I will continue using Docker to build it both for production and for development, but I will deploy in those two environments using kubectl in one in development and Kustomize in another. And I could go much further than that. I could say, hey, in production, you build using Kaniko, and locally or development use Docker, and so on and so forth. We can extend it greatly. I did not want to complicate the example, but here in a simple one, you can already see how we can actually start creating different, they call it profiles, or how it behaves in different environments. So if this would be now production, let's say, and imagine that I'm running this from some kind of pipeline or workflow, I don't know, Argo workflows, Jenkins, Codefresh, whichever pipelines you're using. I will not show you a pipeline because I just want to show you a command, and then you just copy and paste the command into your pipelines. That should be easy. So let's say that in our pipelines, we want to build and deploy, just as I did locally right now in development environment on my laptop, but that it shouldn't run continuously, right? That we want to, in pipelines, normally we want to build and deploy once, while locally we want to run it continuously whenever we change some code. So instead of scaffold dev, we would execute something like scaffold run. Run means basically do it one time. And we would like to define a new profile and say, hey, do not do the development here, do profile prod. So let's see what will happen, right? There we are. It is building again because I changed the source code. I copied the file. If I didn't change the source code, it would not rebuild the image because the image already exists. So it did more or less the same things as it did when I was simulating development, but this time using Kustomize, while locally I'm using kubectl. And it did it once, not in a loop, not continuously like a daemon, but only once, because that's the difference between run and dev. And let's see what did we get. Kubectl -- namespace production, right? Because this one is configured to deploy to production, while dev is configured to deploy to the default namespace, and get all and ingress, let's say, ingress. And here we are. Now it's deployed to production. If I put this command into my CI/CD pipeline, I would have everything I need to have to build and deploy. In this case, using Kustomize and Docker, but it could be Kaniko, it could be something else, right? What else can we do? We can also delete, scaffold, delete, profile, production, prod. And it's gone. It deleted whatever it needed to be deleted from production. But I could say, you know what? I would like to continue building using Skaffold in production, but none of the deployment methods suits my needs in production. Using Kustomize or kubectl might be good locally, it might be good in preview environments, but for production I might want to use something else. Maybe I would like, let me think, Argo CD, for example, right? And in that case, I do not want Skaffold to deploy. And I could solve this. I can say, hey, instead of Skaffold run, Skaffold build. I just want Skaffold to build for production instead of deploying to production, right? So I would just say Skaffold build, and it will build my image. Actually, now it didn't build anything because the image was already built. So it detected that there are no differences. I didn't make any changes to the source code. Or I might say, hey, I would like Skaffold to build and deploy, but between building and deploying, I would like to do something else, maybe run some functional tests, something that cannot be defined in Docker. And that's a possibility as well, because I can say Skaffold, build, and quiet. And what that, I don't know how to write quiet, embarrassing. And what that gives me is a JSON file that contains all the information, and later on I can reference that JSON file when I want to deploy. I can also now use that to deploy. I could do scaffold build -- quiet, and then pipe the output of the JSON to scaffold deploy, and then build artifacts dash, right? So either I would have build and deploy as separate processes and something happening in between. And in that case, I would redirect output of the build to the file, and then I would execute scaffold deploy build artifacts and the path to that file with the JSON that contains the specific tag that I want to deploy. Or I can just pipe one into another and then use dash, which symbolizes standard input. And there we go. It's building and it is deploying. Actually, it's already using the image that was built before, and now it is deployed again. And then I can also delete, right? There's a lot of possibilities about it that might be very, very useful. It's a extremely useful wrapper around those things. Is there anything else interesting? I mean, there are many. Yes, one more thing. Skaffold render. I can allow Skaffold to render my manifests. Now, you can say, hey, how is this useful? Actually, it is very useful because these are not the exact manifests that I have in my Kustomize or Kubernetes or whatever. What it did is that it modified my manifests and changed the image to be the tag that it built, right? So it modified my manifests to include the tag of the image that it built previously. Clever guy. Now let's go back to the full screen. Let's see myself in full glory and let's discuss the pros and cons of Skaffold and whether you should use it. Skaffold is a tiny tool that doesn't have pretentious objectives. It is not trying to change the way how we work. It is not trying to change the world. It is not really ambitious. It's small, and that's what makes it fantastic. But before I go back and explain what I really like about Skaffold, let me tell you about the downsides or the issues that I have with Skaffold. Actually, I do not have issues with Skaffold. I have issues with Skaffold documentation. It's horrible. It's horrifyingly bad. I mean, if you go through a quick start, you get up and running immediately, but once you start going deeper and try to figure out how to do something more specific, you enter the world of pain. There are only a few examples and they're very specific, and many of them do not work outside Google and so on and so forth. So docs are horrible. But if what you need is what Skaffold gives you out of the box, or if you're not afraid to experiment a bit and overcome the difficulties of the documentation, then Skaffold is fantastic. It solves some of the problems that I could solve myself. I could write scripts to do things that Skaffold does, but why would I? I already have Skaffold. And the problem that it solves is, to begin with, local development. We all need to do the same thing while developing. We need to write code, and potentially we should never stop writing code. The worst thing about development is write, and then stop doing what you're doing because you need to compile something, you need to deploy something, and so on and so forth. Skaffold automates all that. It runs in a background in a constant loop, and it monitors changes to the source code. Whenever we make some changes, it will rebuild the image and it will do whatever you specified in Dockerfile, and it will deploy that something wherever you want it to deploy it, potentially while developing to the cluster that is in the same place where you're developing, which is often your laptop or maybe Gitpod or something like that. Hey, if you don't know what Gitpod is, the link is above. Anyways. So it really helps development, but it also has that ability to specify profiles so that we can use different tools depending on the context. So I can always say, hey, I want to deploy with Skaffold, I want to build with Skaffold, or I want to do this, or I want to do that. And it's up to Skaffold configuration and Skaffold itself to figure out, hey, but do you want to do this in production? Yes, okay, so this is what should happen. Do you want that something in staging? That's what should happen. And are you working locally or in a dev environment? Then those are the things that should be done. So it basically unifies the tools into a cohesive group so that we can always interact with Skaffold whenever we need to build and deploy, no matter whether that's with Docker, with Kaniko, with Kustomize, with kubectl, and so on and so forth. It is wrapper around tools. And that sounds like a simple thing, and it is. And that's what makes Skaffold awesome. It is a tiny tool that is very useful, and I strongly recommend it to everyone. So try it out, use it if you like it. I strongly recommend it. And if you have a use case that is not already in Skaffold, hey, make a pull request, extend it, contribute to the community. That's it. This is the end of the video. You know what to do. Subscribe, hit the like button, all that jazz. See you next time. Cheers.